you so much for having me. Bonjour. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I am the executive director and founder of our Children's Trust, and I'm an attorney. I'm also a mother. And what our Children's Trust does is we elevate young people's voices around the world in taking action on climate change. We help them to bring legal actions against their governments, to compel science-based emission reductions that will actually stabilize the climate and protect our oceans. And we work with top experts around the world, like Dr. James Hansen and his colleagues, who are internationally renowned, and working on the scientific prescription for how do we stabilize climate and avoid the severe ocean acidification that we face. And the work that we do as lawyers it's very campaign-based. We're trying to hold the world's governments accountable. Because right now, as many of you know, even with the Paris Agreement, there's not a binding enforcement mechanism for some of the most important countries, like the country I live in, the United States, which is the most responsible for causing the problem and is not doing nearly enough, and in fact is continuing to make the problem worse. So I want to give a little bit of background about the law that we use, because what we're doing is very different from what has been done in the United States for years and also in other countries. We are using two basic principles, legal principles. One is what is known as the public trust doctrine. It comes from ancient Roman law and the time of Justinian, and it came to the United States through the King of England. And because it's found in the Roman Code, and it's also part of common law traditions, it applies and is found in legal systems throughout the world. And the public trust doctrine, it's a very simple concept that government is a trustee or a protector over vital natural resources like air and water and our climate system. And it must hold those resources in trust for the beneficiaries, who are the citizens, but not just present generations of citizens, but future generations as well. And there's a legal argument to be made that governments are violating the rights of the beneficiaries, the future generations. So that's part of the legal underpinning of the work that we're doing. And it really strikes at the heart of intergenerational justice. We also look for constitutional rights, fundamental rights, basic human rights that can be found in constitutions across the United States, but also abroad in other jurisdictions, that captures really the fundamental right that is at stake, especially for these young people. And so I want to tell you the story of the case against the United States in a moment. We just had a big hearing on Tuesday this week, which is why I'm not in France. And I'll go over that. I think it will capture the flavor of the work that we do. But I also want to let you know that we work in countries around the world. So right now we're working in Pakistan, Canada, the Philippines, Uganda, Australia, the United Kingdom, Bangladesh, Norway. There was a case just yesterday filed by young people in Sweden to try to prevent coal from being sold and burned elsewhere. And indeed, we're even working with lawyers in France and young people in France, and we're very excited about that. And we'll be going to Marrakesh to actually help train attorneys from the Middle East and North Africa to similarly bring this kind of strategic climate litigation. So we're hoping that this movement will grow and that we'll be able to support more young people and more attorneys around the world and really bringing those domestic enforcement cases that are so important. And we will continue to work closely with our partners in the Netherlands and Belgium. I'm sure many of you have heard of the great success of Urgenda and Roger Cox, who are close colleagues of ours. So to explain about the US federal case, I represent 21 young people. They are ages now 9 to 20. They were 8 to 19 years old when we started the case. And Dr. James Hansen, who to me is one of the most amazing climate scientists on the planet, and has said that we can't allow CO2 levels to stay at their current level of over 400 parts per million. We need to bring them back down to 350 parts per million. And he has the prescription, the science-based prescription for doing that. He is also a plaintiff representing his granddaughter on the case and representing future generations. So the case is brought under the US Constitution for violating fundamental rights to life, liberty, and property, and personal security. It's also brought under the federal public trust doctrine, which I explained. And what has happened in the case is we filed it about a year ago against the government. And one way we argue the case, one of the tests we have to show, is that our government has taken actions to put these young people's lives in danger, has created a dangerous situation for them. And then, with the full knowledge that that danger existed, they've continued to act in ways that will harm these young people and future generations. And they haven't done anything about it, or they've done very little about it. And I want to talk about that. The other thing that we're arguing is that young people are being discriminated against as a class because they will, in fact, suffer far worse than the adult generation and generations that have preceded them. And that the economic benefits that are accruing to adults in the present generation, and particularly special interests like the fossil fuel industry, are to the disadvantage of an entire class of people. And this argument of equal protection under the law can also be found in constitutions around the world. And it's a powerful argument. So when we filed the case, the fossil fuel industry decided they wanted to intervene in the case as defendants. So we have 3 trade associations, the biggest in the world. American Petroleum Institute is one. And they represent all of the fossil fuel industry: Exxon, Mobil, BP, the Coke industries. All of the big players are now defendants through these trade associations in our case, which means we have the United States sitting side by side with the fossil fuel industry defending a case against 21 young people and arguing that they don't have these rights to life and liberty and property and personal security in the face of climate change. So they've been arguing for the case to be dismissed. And we received one really wonderful decision, a big win last April from one judge who said the case should not be dismissed. It should go forward to the merits of the case. And on Tuesday, we were back in court for a second judge to review that initial decision. And we had hundreds and hundreds of people outside the courthouse. There were 3 courtrooms filled here in Oregon where the case was argued in federal court, and people filling courtrooms up the West Coast where they live streamed the hearing. And I just want to express how much public support there is for what these young people are standing up and doing and taking on the United States federal government. And it was an exciting day because we had a judge who was very well prepared. She had read all of the materials, and she really asked a lot of hard questions to our government attorney and to the fossil fuel industry. And I'm optimistic that we are going to be moving forward to what will be an enormous trial in that case against the United States government and the fossil fuel industry. Some of the evidence that we're using and the story that goes behind this is we have evidence that the United States has known for over 50 years, since at least 1955, that by continuing to burn fossil fuels and emit carbon dioxide, we would be causing catastrophic, in fact, they used the word apocalyptic impacts. They knew that the oceans would acidify in the 1950s. They knew that climate would be destabilized. They knew that the seas would rise and the ice sheets would melt. And yet, from the 1950s onward, with all this science in front of them, they chose to continue a national fossil fuel-based energy system. And here in the United States, as in many countries, it's actually government that controls those energy systems. And at least in the United States, we control the supply of our energy, we control the production, we lease much of our fossil fuels that we use from being extracted from our federal public lands. And then we permit and approve all of the pollution that comes out of that engine. And during the argument on Tuesday, I used the analogy of a coin. On one side is heads, and that's the energy system that governments dictate for their countries. And on the other side is tails, and those are the environmental agencies that are supposed to be controlling that pollution and limiting it, or whatever the body may be in a particular country. And that system, that coin, is ending up in the pocket of special interest groups like the fossil fuel industry, to extreme cost to young people and future generations. And so what we really need is a big movement to hold domestic governments accountable for violating not only international laws, to the extent those can be used, but also domestic laws, constitutional rights, the public trust doctrine, and other mechanisms that apply across the world in many countries. So I want to leave you with one story, and it was a story I told on Tuesday. One of my plaintiffs is Jaden, and she lives in Rain, Louisiana. She's 13 years old. And on October 13th at 5 a.m., she woke up and she stepped out of bed and she was ankle deep in water. As she says, she woke up and she stepped right into climate change. Her house had a river of orange sewage and water flowing through it. It destroyed most of their possessions. The walls of their house are now contaminated. And that's one story that's happening all around the world. And so I just want to leave you with the hope that the young people bring, and the power that we can have if we take these actions to court. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia. Julia Olson. Thank you very much.